The boy's shirt was soaked in blood. Officer Ryan Carter's patrol car screeched to a halt as the black boy stumbled into the middle of the street, waving his arms frantically. His deep brown skin glistened with sweat, streaked with dirt and tears, and his wide eyes were filled with terror. Ryan jumped out of the car, adrenaline spiking. "Hey, kid! Are you hurt?" he called, rushing toward the boy. The boy's chest heaved as he gasped for breath. They, they took them, he sobbed, clutching his sides. "Mommy and Emily, they hurt Daddy, and they're coming back for me." Ryan froze for a split second. This wasn't just another neighborhood scuffle. This was far worse. Every instinct in his body screamed danger. He crouched to meet the black boy's trembling gaze, gripping his small shoulders gently. "Slow down. Tell me what happened," Ryan urged, his voice calm but firm. "They took my mom and sister," the boy cried. They hurt my dad. He told me to hide, but now he's not moving." Blood smeared the boy's small hands, and a faint streak of crimson glistened on his dark cheek. The boy's blackness, stark and unmistakable in the dim light, brought a sharp contrast to the blood and dirt covering him. Ryan's stomach turned. This wasn't an accident. Someone had done this deliberately. "What's your name?" Ryan asked, trying to steady the boy's trembling frame. Jake Harper," the black boy stammered. Ryan placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Okay, Jake, you're safe now, but we have to act fast. Are you hurt?" Jake shook his head quickly, glancing over his shoulder as though expecting someone to burst out of the shadows. "No, but they said they'd come back for me." Ryan's pulse quickened. Whoever they were, they had left a trail of destruction behind. And if they were coming back, there was no time to waste. "Get in the car," Ryan said firmly, opening the passenger door. "We're going to your house. You need to tell me everything you saw." As Jake climbed in, Ryan grabbed his radio. His voice was steel as he issued the call. "Dispatch, this is Officer Carter. Possible abduction in progress. Request immediate backup at Maplewood Heights." With sirens off, Ryan sped toward Jake's house, each second stretching into eternity. Jake's trembling voice filled the silence as he recounted the nightmare. "There were 3 of them," Jake said, his voice cracking. "They had masks, and one of them was yelling at Mom to get in the van. Daddy tried to stop them, but they hit him." "What kind of van?" Ryan asked, his grip tightening on the wheel. "Black, big, with dark windows," Jake whispered. Ryan's mind raced. Every detail mattered. "Jake, you're brave for coming to me. We're going to find them. I promise." But even as he said the words, the weight of the unknown pressed down on him. What would he find at the Harper residence? And would he be in time to stop whatever nightmare was unfolding? The quiet suburban streets of Maplewood Heights blurred past as Ryan sped toward Jake's house. The black boy sat silently in the passenger seat, clutching the seatbelt with trembling hands. His wide, tear-filled eyes stared straight ahead, his deep brown skin glistening faintly under the car's interior light. "Jake, I need you to keep talking to me," Ryan said, his voice calm but urgent. "You said there were 3 men. What else can you remember?" Jake swallowed hard, his small frame trembling. "One of them had a deep voice," he said softly. "He kept yelling at Mommy to shut up and get in the van. Daddy told me to hide behind the bushes, so I didn't see everything." Ryan nodded, his knuckles tightening on the wheel. "You did the right thing, Jake. You're very brave." Jake glanced at him, his voice barely above a whisper. "Do you think Daddy's okay?" Ryan hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "I don't know, but I promise we'll do everything we can to help him, and to bring your mom and sister home." The boy nodded, wiping his nose on his sleeve. Despite his clear fear, his expression showed a hint of determination, drawing strength from Ryan's steady demeanor. As they approached the Harper residence, Ryan's stomach churned. The house appeared peaceful at first glance, bathed in the golden glow of the late afternoon sun. But the slightly ajar front door and the eerie silence told a different story. Ryan parked the cruiser and turned to Jake. "Stay here," he instructed firmly. "Do not leave this car unless I tell you. Understand?" Jake nodded, gripping the seatbelt tightly as though it were a lifeline. "Please don't let them come back," he whispered, his voice cracking with fear. Ryan crouched to meet his gaze. "You're safe here. I'll handle it." Ryan approached the house cautiously, his hand hovering near his holstered weapon. The front door creaked softly as he pushed it open, stepping inside. The scene that greeted him was one of chaos. The living room was a wreck. Furniture lay overturned, a shattered lamp littered the floor, and family photos were scattered and broken. Blood smeared the carpet, forming a trail that led toward the staircase. "Peter Harper," Ryan called, his voice cutting through the silence. "This is Officer Ryan Carter. Can you hear me?" A faint groan broke the stillness. Ryan followed the sound to the base of the stairs, where a man lay sprawled on the floor. His shirt was soaked in blood, and a gash on his forehead oozed fresh crimson. Dropping to one knee, Ryan checked for a pulse. Relief flooded through him when he found one, faint but present. "Dispatch, this is Officer Carter," he said into his radio, his voice steady despite the dread creeping into his chest. "I have an unconscious adult male with head trauma at 148 Maplewood Drive, requesting immediate medical assistance and backup." Peter stirred weakly, his eyelids fluttering. "Sarah, Emily," he mumbled, his voice hoarse and barely audible. "They're not here," Ryan said gently. "Help is on the way. Can you tell me what happened?" Peter grimaced, wincing in pain. "3 men, masks. They took them. Hurt me." Ryan nodded, filing away the details. "Stay with me, Peter. Paramedics are on their way." Standing, Ryan scanned the room for more clues. His eyes landed on a crumpled piece of paper wedged beneath the edge of an overturned coffee table. Carefully, he picked it up. The hastily scrawled message made his stomach drop. $500,000, no cops, 48 hours, or you'll never see them again. This wasn't random. It was calculated. Ryan stepped back outside, his mind racing. Jake watched him anxiously from the passenger seat, his tear-streaked face pressed against the window. Ryan approached the car, crouching to meet Jake's gaze. "Jake, your dad is hurt, but he's alive," Ryan said softly. "The paramedics are going to take care of him. I need you to be strong for a little longer." Jake sniffled, nodding. "Do you think they'll hurt Mommy and Emily?" Ryan placed a firm hand on Jake's shoulder, meeting his wide, tear-filled eyes. "Not if we can help it, and we're going to do everything we can to find them." The boy's small frame shook as he whispered, "Promise?" "I promise." The Harper residence was now a hive of activity. Police cars lined the street, their silent presence a stark contrast to the chaos inside the house. Officers moved quickly, documenting the scene, while paramedics tended to Peter Harper, who was being stabilized on a stretcher. Ryan stood near the front door, reviewing the ransom note. $500,000. No cops. 48 hours. The clock was already ticking, and every second mattered. He turned to Jake, the black boy who sat quietly in the patrol car. His knees were pulled to his chest, and his deep brown skin glistened faintly with tears under the evening light. "Jake," Ryan said gently, crouching beside the open car door. "I know this is hard, but I need you to think carefully. Did you hear or see anything else about the men? Anything at all?" Jake frowned, his small brows furrowing in concentration. "One of them had a deep voice," he said slowly. "He kept yelling. And I think they said something about a warehouse." Ryan's ears perked up at the mention of a potential location. "A warehouse? Are you sure?" Jake nodded hesitantly. "Yeah, and they said they didn't have much time." Ryan offered him a reassuring smile. "That's really helpful, Jake. You're doing great." Standing, Ryan signaled for Martinez, who had just arrived. "We've got 3 masked suspects, a black van, and a possible mention of a warehouse," Ryan explained. "Start canvassing the neighbors. Someone might have seen or heard something unusual." Martinez nodded. "We'll check for security cameras, too. Maybe one of them caught something." Inside the house, the forensic team worked methodically. A faint, muddy footprint near the front door had been photographed and cast, while partial tire tracks in the driveway hinted at a hurried departure. Blood smears on the carpet told a grim story of a struggle, ending where Peter Harper had collapsed at the foot of the stairs. Ryan stepped inside to inspect the scene again. The overturned furniture and shattered glass painted a picture of chaos and violence. "Anything new?" he asked one of the technicians. "We've got partial tread marks in the driveway," she replied, gesturing to a diagram. Consistent with a large vehicle, likely a van. Ryan nodded, filing the detail away. And the blood trail? Looks like Peter fought back, the technician said, examining the smears. But he was outnumbered. They dragged him to the staircase after he was injured. Ryan's jaw tightened. Whoever these people were, they hadn't hesitated to use force. The stakes were growing higher with every piece of evidence. Outside, Jake sat quietly in the patrol car, watching as the paramedics loaded his father into the ambulance. Ryan approached him again, his expression calm and steady. "Jake, your dad is going to the hospital now," he said. "He's in good hands." Jake sniffled, clutching the blanket draped over his shoulders. "Do you think Mommy and Emily are okay?" Ryan crouched to meet his eyes. "I don't know, Jake, but I promise we're going to do everything we can to find them." The boy nodded, his small frame trembling. Ryan placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder before stepping away to rejoin the officers. An officer jogged up, holding a tablet. "We've got surveillance footage from a traffic camera about a mile from here," he said. A black van matching the description was spotted speeding through an intersection. Ryan studied the grainy footage, which showed the van racing past. Its dark windows reflected the sunlight, giving away little else. "Did you track it any further?" he asked. "We're pulling additional footage from cameras in the area," the officer replied. "But it'll take time." "Good work," Ryan said, handing the tablet back. "Keep me updated." Minutes later, Martinez returned with an update. "A neighbor a few houses down heard shouting around 3 p.m., he reported. Saw a black van parked in the driveway, but didn't think much of it at the time. Said it sped off toward the industrial district." Ryan's pulse quickened. The industrial district was a sprawling maze of warehouses and factories, many of them abandoned. It was the perfect place to hide, and the perfect place to stage something far worse. Ryan issued orders quickly. "We're focusing on the industrial district," he said. "Martinez, start organizing a task force. We'll need backup, forensic support, and surveillance coordination." Martinez nodded. "On it." Ryan turned back to Jake, who was still sitting in the car, his tear-streaked face pressed against the window. "Hang in there, kid," Ryan said softly. "We're getting closer." The convoy of police vehicles moved swiftly through the city, sirens off to avoid drawing attention. Ryan rode in the lead car, his thoughts racing. Every second brought them closer to the 48-hour deadline, and the pressure was mounting. "We'll split into teams to cover more ground," Martinez said from the passenger seat. "The industrial district is huge, but if we pinpoint the van's movements, we can narrow it down." Ryan nodded. "Check every warehouse, every abandoned building. We're not stopping until we find them." Arriving at the outskirts of the industrial district, the task force split into groups. Officers fanned out, flashlights cutting through the growing darkness as they searched for any sign of the kidnappers or their vehicle. "Zone 1, clear," came the crackle of a radio. "No sign of the van." "Zone 2, same here," another officer reported. Ryan's frustration grew, but he forced himself to stay focused. The kidnappers had left a trail. They just had to find it. Finally, a breakthrough came. "Zone 3 to base," an officer's voice crackled over the radio. "We've located a black van parked behind a warehouse on the south side. No visible movement." Ryan's pulse quickened. "Copy that. All units converge on the south side, but keep your distance. We'll approach on foot." The officers regrouped quickly, moving with precision and silence. The van was parked in the shadows, its dark windows reflecting the faint glow of a nearby streetlight. Ryan's heart pounded as he prepared to take the next step. The industrial district loomed large, its crumbling warehouses and rusted machinery casting eerie shadows under the faint light of the moon. Ryan's team approached the warehouse cautiously, their steps muffled by the gravel-strewn ground. The black van was parked near a loading dock, its dark windows revealing no hint of what lay inside. Ryan signaled for his team to stop, crouching behind an abandoned crate as he surveyed the scene. "Martinez," he whispered into his radio, "secure the perimeter. No one gets in or out." "Copy that," Martinez replied. Moments later, officers began spreading out, positioning themselves to block any escape routes. The quiet hum of radios was the only sound breaking the stillness. Ryan motioned for his team to move closer to the warehouse. Through a gap in the building's siding, he could make out faint movements and muffled voices. He held up a hand, signaling for silence, as he pressed his ear to the crack. Inside, Victor paced angrily, his sharp features twisted in frustration. The table in front of him was cluttered with burner phones, maps, and a small stack of cash. The stocky man leaned against the wall, arms crossed, while the nervous man with the limp hovered near the stairs, his anxiety palpable. "They're stalling," Victor growled, slamming a fist on the table. "The money should have been here by now." The stocky man shrugged. "Maybe you pushed too hard. You upped the ransom and shortened the deadline. What did you expect?" Victor's icy gaze snapped toward him. "Don't question me," he hissed. "We stick to the plan." In the corner, Sarah and Emily sat tied to chairs, their faces pale and tear-streaked. Emily clung to her mother, her small body trembling. Sarah whispered softly to her daughter, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her. "Stay quiet, Emily. Listen to me. We'll get through this." Victor stormed over to them, dragging a chair across the concrete floor with a screech. He sat in front of Sarah, leaning in close. "You think your husband's going to save you?" he sneered. "You're here because of him. He's weak." Sarah met his gaze, refusing to flinch. "Peter will come through," she said firmly. "And when he does, you'll regret ever doing this." Victor smirked, leaning back. "Oh, I'm counting on Peter. But when he realizes he's out of options, I'll make sure he knows what happens when you cross me." Outside, Ryan whispered into his radio. "Visual on 2 hostages. No immediate threats near them. Preparing to breach." Martinez's voice crackled back. "Perimeter secure. Ready on your signal." Ryan took a deep breath. "Flash bangs first, then we move." He raised his hand, counting down silently. 3, 2, 1. The warehouse door burst open with a deafening crack, and flash bangs exploded, filling the space with blinding light and a concussive roar. Inside, chaos erupted. The kidnappers stumbled, shouting in confusion as the SWAT team stormed in. "Hands in the air!" Ryan shouted, his voice cutting through the noise. "Nobody move!" Victor reacted instantly, grabbing Sarah and pulling a knife from his belt. He pressed it against her neck, his voice raw with desperation. "Back off, or I swear I'll kill her." The nervous man with the limp stumbled backward, raising his hands in surrender. "Victor, this wasn't the plan," he shouted, his voice cracking. "Shut up," Victor snapped, his eyes darting around the room. "Nobody's leaving until I say so." Ryan stepped forward slowly, his weapon drawn but pointed downward. "Victor, listen to me," he said, his tone calm but firm. "This doesn't have to end badly. Let Sarah and Emily go, and we'll talk." Victor's gaze flicked between Ryan and the SWAT team. Sweat glistened on his forehead, and his grip on the knife wavered. "You think I'm stupid?" he snarled. "You've got snipers outside, don't you?" "We're not here to hurt anyone," Ryan replied, "but you're not walking out of this unless you cooperate. Let them go, Victor. It's over." Sarah's heart pounded as she watched the exchange, her mind racing. She noticed the nervous man inching closer, his posture uncertain. Summoning her courage, she made her move. With all her strength, she drove her elbow into the man's side, causing him to stumble and knock into Victor. "Now!" Ryan shouted. The SWAT team moved with precision. An officer tackled Victor, disarming him before he could react. Another subdued the nervous man, pinning him to the ground. The stocky man, attempting to flee, was intercepted and restrained near the rear exit. "Clear!" an officer called out. Ryan rushed to Sarah and Emily, cutting the ropes that bound them. Emily threw her arms around her mother, sobbing into her shoulder. Sarah winced as she moved her neck, the shallow cut from Victor's knife stinging, but her voice was steady. "It's okay, Emily. We're safe now." Ryan crouched beside them, his expression one of relief and reassurance. "You're both going to be okay," he said. "Paramedics are on their way." As the SWAT team secured the warehouse, they discovered more than just weapons and ropes. A locked briefcase under the table contained incriminating documents linking Victor to a larger criminal network. Photographs, names, and account numbers painted a chilling picture of an expansive operation. Martinez flipped through the papers, his expression grim. "Looks like Victor was small time compared to whoever's running this." Ryan nodded, his jaw tightening. "This isn't over, but it's a start." Minutes later, sirens filled the air as paramedics and additional officers arrived. A car screeched to a halt near the warehouse, and Peter Harper emerged, his face pale and drawn. Jake bolted from the car, sprinting toward his mother. "Mommy!" Jake cried, throwing himself into Sarah's arms. Sarah hugged him tightly, tears streaming down her face. "I'm here, sweetheart. I'm here." Peter joined them, pulling Sarah and Emily into a protective embrace. "I thought I'd lost you," he whispered, his voice breaking. "We're okay," Sarah replied, her voice a mix of exhaustion and relief. "Thanks to them." Ryan stepped back, watching their reunion with quiet satisfaction. They had won this battle, but he knew the fight wasn't over. The precinct was alive with activity, the buzz of voices and the hum of computers creating an undercurrent of urgency. Ryan sat at a long table in the conference room, reviewing the evidence collected from the warehouse. The briefcase containing documents, photographs, and account numbers painted a chilling picture of an organized and far-reaching criminal network. Martinez entered, carrying a fresh stack of reports. "Forensics confirmed that the burner phones and cash match transactions tied to shell companies," he said, dropping the papers onto the table. "All of them lead back to one name, Trevor Blake." Ryan stiffened at the mention. "Peter Harper's old business partner?" Martinez nodded grimly. "Looks like he's been funding these operations for months, picking targets with personal grudges or people he can extort." Ryan leaned back, running a hand over his face. "So this wasn't just about money, it was revenge." Martinez gestured toward the map pinned to the wall, which was now dotted with locations tied to Trevor Blake's activities. "He's been careful, but he made a mistake linking this job to Victor and his crew. We've got enough to bring him in." Meanwhile, in the interrogation room, Victor sat with his arms crossed, his expression a mask of defiance. Detective Martinez stood across from him, flipping through a case file with deliberate slowness. "You're facing a mountain of charges," Martinez began, his voice sharp. "Kidnapping, extortion, conspiracy, and now we've got evidence linking you to a larger criminal operation. If you want any shot at a lighter sentence, now's the time to talk." Victor smirked, leaning back in his chair. "I'm not saying a word. You don't have anything solid." Martinez raised an eyebrow. "We've got your burner phones, your accomplices, and a room full of evidence from the warehouse. When the jury sees the fear in that little girl's eyes and hears her mother testify, you'll wish you'd cooperated." For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed Victor's face, but he remained silent. In the adjacent interrogation room, the man with the limp was a different story. He sat hunched over, his hands shaking as he rubbed them nervously. Ryan entered the room, his calm but firm demeanor filling the space. "We know you weren't the mastermind," Ryan said, sitting across from him. "Victor won't protect you, and Blake won't either. But you have a chance to help yourself here. Tell us what you know." The man hesitated, his gaze darting to the one-way mirror. "If I talk, they'll come after me." Ryan leaned forward, his voice steady. "They're already going down. We've got enough to dismantle their whole operation, but you have to decide if you want to go down with them or if you want a way out." The man sighed heavily, his resolve crumbling. "Blake," he muttered. "Trevor Blake set the whole thing up. He funds the jobs, picks the targets, and gives the orders." Ryan's eyes narrowed. "Why Peter Harper?" The man hesitated before replying. "Blake said Harper owed him. Something about a business falling out. He wanted to send a message." Ryan returned to the conference room where Martinez was organizing the growing pile of evidence. "We've got him," Ryan said, his voice filled with quiet determination. "Trevor Blake orchestrated the whole thing." Martinez nodded. "Forensics is tracing the financial records now. We've got accounts, shell companies, and payouts that all point back to him." Another officer rushed in, holding a printout. "Blake's been located," she announced. "He's booked a flight out of state. Departure is in 3 hours." Ryan's jaw tightened. "He's running," he said, grabbing his gear. "Not on my watch." Under the cover of darkness, the tactical team surrounded the private airfield where Blake's jet waited on the tarmac. The sleek black car pulled up to the plane, and Trevor Blake stepped out, his expensive suit and calm demeanor betraying no sense of urgency. Ryan watched from a concealed position, his radio crackling softly with updates. "All units in position," Martinez's voice came through. "Waiting on your signal." Ryan took a deep breath, his gaze fixed on Blake. "Move in." The team swarmed the airfield, their weapons drawn. "Trevor Blake, you're under arrest," Ryan shouted. Blake froze, his hands instinctively raising as officers surrounded him. "This is a mistake," he protested, his voice dripping with indignation. "I've done nothing wrong." Ryan stepped forward, holding up a folder containing the incriminating evidence. "Save it for the courtroom," he said coldly. "We've got all the proof we need." As Blake was handcuffed and led to a waiting squad car, his composure began to crack. "You'll regret this," he snarled. "You don't know who you're dealing with." Ryan remained calm. "We know exactly who we're dealing with." Back at the precinct, Peter Harper sat with Sarah and Emily, their hands entwined. Relief and exhaustion were etched into their faces, but there was a quiet strength in their resolve. Ryan entered, his expression tired but satisfied. "Trevor Blake is in custody," he said, "and we've got enough evidence to dismantle his entire operation." Peter stood, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you," he said simply, "for everything." Ryan nodded. "It's what we're here for." The news of Trevor Blake's arrest spread quickly, sending shock waves through the community. Once a respected businessman, his carefully constructed facade crumbled as the truth of his actions came to light. Peter, still recovering from his injuries, addressed reporters outside his home. "What happened to my family was horrific, but it exposed something much bigger," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion behind it. "Trevor Blake used his power and resources to destroy lives. I won't stop until he's held accountable." Inside, Sarah watched Peter's statement on the news, her resolve hardening. She turned to Emily and Jake, her voice firm. "We'll testify," she said. "We'll make sure they never hurt anyone else." With Blake in custody and Victor's gang dismantled, the police began building an airtight case. The evidence was overwhelming, and the DA was confident that justice would prevail. For Ryan, the case was far from over, but this victory was a step in the right direction. "This is just the beginning," Ryan said to his team. "We've taken them off the streets. Now we make sure they stay there." The courtroom was silent, the air heavy with anticipation. Every seat in the gallery was filled. Reporters, community members, and victims of Trevor Blake's schemes sat side by side, eager to witness the trial's outcome. At the center of it all sat the Harper family, their presence a testament to their resilience. Peter held Sarah's hand tightly, his knuckles white. Beside them, Emily sat close to her mother, her face pale but determined. Jake, the black boy who had been at the center of this nightmare, insisted on attending every session. His deep brown eyes took in the scene, his small hand gripping Sarah's firmly. The judge entered and the murmurs in the gallery ceased. The trial of Trevor Blake, Victor, and their accomplices had begun. Sarah was the first to take the stand, her voice steady as she recounted the harrowing details of her family's abduction. Her testimony painted a vivid picture of the fear and desperation they had endured. "Victor threatened to kill us if my husband didn't pay the ransom," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I didn't know if we'd make it out alive, but I had to stay strong for my daughter." The prosecutor nodded, her expression somber. "Mrs. Harper, can you identify the man who made these threats?" Sarah pointed directly at Victor, who sat at the defense table, his face impassive. "It was him." Victor's expression didn't waver, but the murmurs in the gallery grew louder before the judge called for order. Emily's testimony followed. Though her voice was small and timid, her courage shone through as she described the terrifying moments in the warehouse. "Victor said he would hurt Mommy if Daddy didn't bring the money," Emily whispered, her eyes glistening with tears. "I thought he was going to—" Her voice broke, and Sarah reached out to comfort her. The courtroom was silent, every person hanging on the young girl's words. "You were very brave, Emily," the prosecutor said gently. "Your testimony is helping us ensure this doesn't happen to anyone else." Ryan Carter took the stand next, his demeanor professional and composed. His account of the investigation was thorough, detailing the evidence that linked Trevor Blake to the crimes. "Officer Carter," the defense attorney began, "isn't it true that you relied on unverified information during your investigation?" Ryan met the lawyer's gaze evenly. "Every lead we followed was substantiated by evidence," he replied. "Financial records, testimonies, and surveillance footage leave no doubt about Mr. Blake's involvement." The defense attorney pressed further. But Ryan's answers remained concise and unwavering. By the time he left the stand, it was clear his testimony had solidified the prosecution's case. The evidence presented was damning. Financial records linked Trevor Blake to shell companies funding the criminal network. Surveillance footage from the warehouse and docks confirmed the movements of Victor and his accomplices. The briefcase recovered from the scene contained detailed notes on Blake's operations, including his plans to target Peter Harper. This was not a random act of violence, the prosecutor declared during her closing argument. It was a calculated, cold-blooded scheme designed to extort money and settle personal vendettas. Trevor Blake and his accomplices used their power and resources to destroy lives. But today, justice will prevail. The jury deliberated for only a few hours before returning with their verdicts. Trevor Blake was found guilty on all counts, including conspiracy to commit kidnapping, extortion, and racketeering. The judge sentenced him to 20 years in prison, his once pristine reputation in ruins. Victor and his accomplices received equally harsh sentences. Victor was sentenced to 15 years for his role as the ringleader, while the other kidnappers each received 10 years for their involvement. Trevor's stoic expression faltered as the sentences were read, his shoulders slumping in defeat. For the Harper family, it was a moment of bittersweet relief. Outside the courtroom, reporters swarmed Peter as he stood with his family. His voice was steady but emotional as he addressed the crowd. "What happened to my family was a nightmare," he began, "but it exposed something much bigger. Trevor Blake used his power to harm others, and he was able to do so for far too long. Today, we took a step toward ensuring this doesn't happen again." Sarah stood beside him, her arm around Emily. "We'll testify again if we have to," she added. "No one deserves to go through what we did." The family's courage resonated with the community, inspiring others to come forward with their stories. Trevor Blake's trial became a catalyst for uncovering a broader network of corruption and crime. The Harper family's journey to healing wasn't easy, but it was one they faced together. With counseling and the support of their community, they began to rebuild their lives. Peter focused on his contracting business, vowing to create a stable future for his family. Sarah became an advocate for victims of crime, using her voice to bring awareness to the dangers of unchecked power. Emily found solace in art therapy, channeling her experiences into drawings that reflected her resilience. Jake, despite his young age, demonstrated a quiet strength that inspired his family. One sunny afternoon, Ryan Carter patrolled the Harper's neighborhood and saw Jake playing soccer in the front yard. The boy waved enthusiastically and Ryan couldn't help but smile. Pulling his patrol car to a stop, Ryan stepped out and walked over. "Hey Jake, how's the soccer practice going?" Jake grinned, his dark skin glistening in the sun. "Great, I'm going to be team captain next week." "That's impressive," Ryan replied, crouching to Jake's level. "You know, you're one of the bravest kids I've ever met." Jake shrugged bashfully, kicking the ball gently. "I just wanted to make sure we all got through it." Ryan nodded, his expression thoughtful. "And you did. You helped more than you know." As Jake returned to his game, Ryan climbed back into his car, a quiet sense of pride settling over him. The Harpers were healing, and that made all the difference. The Harper family's new home was a modest two-story house in a quiet neighborhood. It wasn't as large or luxurious as their previous one, but it was filled with warmth and hope, a safe space where they could begin to rebuild their lives. Peter stood on the porch, watching Jake kick a soccer ball against the garage door. The black boy's deep brown skin glistened with sweat in the afternoon sun, his movements fluid and confident. Emily sat on the porch steps, her sketch pad resting on her knees as she doodled quietly. The faint sound of birds chirping added to the peaceful atmosphere. Sarah stepped outside, holding 2 glasses of lemonade. She handed one to Peter, her gaze softening as she watched their children. "They're adjusting better than I expected," she said, her voice tinged with relief. Peter nodded, sipping the lemonade. "They're resilient, more than I ever realized." That evening, the family gathered around the dinner table, the atmosphere light and filled with laughter. Emily excitedly shared a drawing she had made in her therapy session, a picture of their family standing together, surrounded by sunshine and bright colors. "This is us," she explained, pointing to each figure. "I made us all smiling because we're safe now." Jake looked at the drawing, then back at his sister. You forgot the soccer ball, he teased, grinning. Emily rolled her eyes playfully. I'll add it next time. Sarah and Peter exchanged a glance, their hearts swelling with pride. Despite everything their children had endured, their spirits remained unbroken. Later that night, Sarah tucked Emily into bed, smoothing her daughter's hair away from her face. You've been so brave, Emily, she said softly. I'm so proud of you. Emily hugged her mother tightly. I was scared, but I knew you'd keep us safe. Sarah's throat tightened, but she forced a smile. And I always will. In Jake's room, Peter sat beside his son, listening as he excitedly recounted his plans for the upcoming soccer match. Coach said I might get to be team captain next week, Jake said, his eyes sparkling with excitement. That's amazing, Jake, Peter replied, ruffling his son's hair. You're going to do great. Jake grew quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. Dad, do you think the bad guys will ever come back? Peter's heart clenched, but he kept his voice steady. No, Jake. They're gone for good, and if anyone ever tries to hurt us again, we'll stop them. I promise. Jake nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. Okay. The following weekend, the family attended a community picnic at a nearby park. It was their first public outing since the ordeal, and the warm welcome they received from neighbors and friends was overwhelming. Welcome back, Harpers, one neighbor said, handing them a basket of baked goods. We're so glad you're safe. As Jake ran off to join a group of kids playing soccer, Peter shook hands with an older man who introduced himself as a retired police officer. Your family's courage inspired a lot of people, the man said. It's a reminder of what really matters. Peter thanked him, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. For the first time in weeks, the weight on his shoulders felt a little lighter. Ryan Carter, too, found closure in the aftermath of the Harper case. One afternoon, while patrolling the Harpers' neighborhood, he saw Jake playing soccer in the front yard. The boy waved enthusiastically, and Ryan couldn't help but smile. Pulling his patrol car to a stop, Ryan stepped out and walked over. Hey, Jake, how's the soccer practice going? Jake beamed, his dark brown skin glowing in the sunlight. Great. I'm going to be team captain next week. That's impressive, Ryan replied, crouching to Jake's level. You know, you're one of the bravest kids I've ever met. Jake shrugged bashfully, kicking the ball gently. I just wanted to make sure we all got through it. Ryan nodded, his expression thoughtful. And you did. You helped more than you know. As Jake returned to his game, Ryan climbed back into his car, a quiet sense of pride settling over him. The Harpers were healing, and that made all the difference. In the weeks that followed, Sarah began volunteering at a local victim advocacy center, using her voice to support families affected by crime. Peter focused on rebuilding his business, vowing to create a stable future for his family. Emily continued her art therapy, creating pieces that reflected both her trauma and her resilience. Jake, despite his young age, found solace and confidence on the soccer field, his team becoming a second family. The Harper family had endured the unthinkable, but they had emerged stronger. Their bond, forged in the fire of adversity, became their greatest strength. One sunny morning, as the family gathered on the porch, Peter looked at his wife and children, his heart swelling with gratitude. We've come a long way, he said quietly, and we'll keep going. Sarah nodded, her eyes glistening. Together. Jake and Emily grinned, their laughter filling the air as they pulled their parents into a group hug. In that moment, the Harpers knew they had found their way back to the light, together.